I'm in an undisclosed backyard in South America somewhere to talk to you about I'm Still Here. This is a movie by the great Brazilian filmmaker Walter Salles, starring Fernando Torres and Celton Mello. And it tells the story of a family living through the military dictatorship in the 1970s, when that dictatorship started to encroach more definitively on the citizens. I thought this movie was amazing. I thought this movie was very strong. So the movie is basically divided into two halves that are quite different from each other. The first half tells the story of the family and how they were with each other. It's the parents and 5 kids, and it shows a lot of their day-to-day life and a lot of what their life was like before the military presence of the government started to directly affect them in a more significant way that wasn't just from the newspaper. And the second half of the movie focuses on Fernanda Torres' character, Eunice Paiva, looking for her husband who was taken by the dictatorship. This is a true story of perseverance and resistance against fascist forces. But this is also, most of all, a story about memory and family and human connection, and how the root of human connection and empathy and joy especially can combat these very mechanical forces of an authoritarian state or a military, violent, repressive system. Yeah, I thought this movie was great. I thought the performances were all excellent, extremely well cast. Celton Mello gives such a beautifully tender, amorous performance as the father of this big family, and he does a great job at being endearing in a very seemingly effortless way. He just has so much joy, and the way that he looks at his kids and his wife and his friends, it really has this spirit to it that is very inspiring and is very important for this movie, because the events that happen in the midpoint of the movie, when he's no longer a part of the film, it becomes really important that he has that presence, that they cast a person that can play this strong guy that at the same time is extremely sensitive. It's very strong presence where you can see that the morality of the character is unshakable. And the 5 kids are pretty good actors. The young portrayal of Marcelo Paiva, who wrote the book that this movie is based on, I felt like that actor was probably the weakest link in the movie. Speaking of weak points, I'd say that there's only a couple of elements that I could point to. It's a very competently made movie. It's extremely well shot, extremely well acted, and very, very focused, maybe to a fault. The 2 moments that kind of took me out of the movie were the moments where it veered slightly too much into a melodramatic territory, when Eunice, Fernanda Torres' character, slaps her daughter. I thought that was a bit too far and a different kind of genre or territory than what this movie is really portraying or trying to go for the rest of the time. That is a very realist drama. The other moment was actually similarly melodramatic. It was when the dog dies in the movie. I felt like the way that was acted, it felt like the movie was trying to amplify the moment to make this big tearjerker moment. And you could tell by the coverage and Fernando Torres' performance in that scene that there's something off going on. It seems like in Torres' performance of that moment, that she is aware that that is a bit too much. When she's yelling and banging on the car door, it just seems like it goes against her character, who is so restrained throughout the rest of the movie. But those are really small details ultimately in the course of this movie. You could say that this movie does suffer in being a bit too focused, and I mean in the sense that it's not too abstract or subjective. It is very clear what the movie is saying at each given moment. There are a lot of details that support the main theme of memory and joyful unity as an act of resistance against military forces or forces of violence that aim to strip away the humanity of a population. It goes from the sound design of the beaches in Rio to the way that the photograph that is the poster for this movie is taken and then readdressed at a couple of different moments and points in the movie. It is a very tight movie, very consistent internally. It is very beautiful. It is almost like a poem, and it really is very focused. It seems to have this central idea of unity and joy, especially as an act of resistance, that is far more enduring and powerful than any amount of military might or repressive force or really almost anything else. In terms of flaws, I would also say that this movie does have a very narrow focus. It is not trying to talk about all of Brazil in that time period. It's not trying to talk about the majority of the population. It is really focusing only on this. It is really focusing only on this privileged white upper class family that had even the opportunity to combat the fascist forces in the way that they did, in the way that Fernanda Torres' character does in her enduring quest for answers after some of the events that happen in the movie. There is a bit of a hint of other things that are going on, but it's almost to the detriment of the story, because you almost start to think, well, what is Zezé's life like? The character that plays the maid of the family and who is there throughout all of this, but who has a different life. And we see in the scene where she is leaving the house and packing up some bags, we see this picture of her and a boy, and it's not clear if that's her son or if that's her brother, but it implies that there's another family there and another reality there. And that makes you wonder, if it was this bad for this family, then what was it like for the rest of the country? Still, I think that the narrow focus does have this double-sided issue about it. In one way, it is very clear in stating the message that it's going for, because it is so centered on the experiences of these particular people in this particular family in this particular time. But on the other hand, it doesn't go as far out into a commentary of the entire country at the time, because it doesn't open up the narrative to other characters that are living in a different situation financially, socially, than that family is. However, that central message of joyfulness as an act of resistance, connection as an act of resistance, empathy, humanness really, is very powerful and very well stated, particularly in the scene when Fernanda Torres is eating ice cream with her family after her husband is already not in the picture. Just thinking about that scene makes me emotional. It is a really powerful statement. And as far as powerful statements go, her performance is absolutely fantastic. It is definitely Oscar worthy, and it is incredibly moving, and a real exercise in restraint. There's so much that is celebrated about the most acting or the most bombastic or showy performance, or sometimes it's the context that the performance appears in that makes it seem better than it is. This is really a case of someone who is really operating at a very refined level of acting, Fernanda Torres. And she is nominated and has already won several awards, but the performance itself is a victory, really, for Brazilian cinema because it so powerfully communicates the message of the movie. It's very good. It's very worth watching, and it is illustrating a proposal of resistance that is a bit subversive from a lot of the louder forms of resistance. This is really having joy as a radical act because of that first half of that movie, the way that that reverberates in this intense focus and strength of spirit, especially on the part of this mother that is caring for 5 kids and then going to law school and conducting this immense quest to get answers about her missing husband. Is very much worth your time. I highly recommend it. And as far as the Oscars go, I think that there is a chance that this movie might win in 1 or 2 categories. I don't really care for the ceremony very much, but I wanted to touch on it because it is a big deal in Brazil. We have a fantastic filmmaker and nominations that are pretty rare to come by for that country. Yeah, it really depends on the political narrative that the Oscars want to go with this year. I think that the Oscars are a completely failed, bankrupt, absurd, trash institution that isn't really worth anything. Ultimately, that's just my opinion. I think that the Ingmar Bergman reaction to getting a nomination seems to be the one that states it most clearly, and that should be the position of filmmakers generally. But at the same time, I recognize that that opens a lot of opportunities and doors for a lot of people working in the film industry in the United States and elsewhere in the world. And it is kind of fun and kind of gossipy, so there is some enjoyment to it, but it really is akin to fast food in my opinion. It's just very self-congratulating, really out of touch in my opinion. But if they wanted to make a political statement with who they give certain awards out to, I think that this movie would be quite a contender for the prizes that it was nominated in, especially given that the entertainment industry in the United States tends to lean towards a liberal view of things where identity politics and this sort of strong stance against fascism is very much a direction that it leans towards. This movie could be a statement against the authoritarianism that is on the rise in the United States in the present day. So it has a very strong potential in that area, if we're talking about the Academy Awards specifically. And more cynically, I would argue that the higher chance it has for winning, for example, Best Picture or Best Foreign Film, really comes from the whitewashing that the United States likes to do. So it would be a perfect opportunity to take the stance of, yes, we are against a dictatorship, even though the United States government was a supporter of that very dictatorship that the movie represents. Fernanda Torres, in my opinion, from all the nominees, she deserves to win. She gave the best performance. It's the strongest performance, it's the most refined, and it's the one that has the most reverberance. And yeah, it's a very beautiful movie, and I highly recommend giving it a watch, even after award seasons are over. Fantastic piece of work by Walter Salles. And really subtle too. I'd really like to rewatch this movie a couple times, especially for the sound design. There's just something going on there and how it's talking about memory, especially. Muito bom. Muito bom. Assista esse filme. Until next time.